The Psalms are central to Jewish and Christian worship traditions. They've been used to express joy and sorrow for individuals and for the community. Some of the key themes of the Psalms are praise of God the Creator, the recognition of God's sovereignty, and attentiveness to God's design. Sometimes the language of the Psalms is raw and powerful, sad, or even angry, which is one reason why the Psalms still have such a powerful effect on us today. Listen now as Melody Knowles highlights the twin themes of praise and lament in the Psalms.
With their vivid and evocative language, the Psalms are sometimes called mirrors of human emotion. Like the human heart, the texts express great joy as well as deep despair. While there are several different types of psalms in the Psalter, most are either psalms of praise or lament. We'll look at several of these psalms and talk about their function. First, the psalms of praise. Texts such as Psalm 147 are often used in corporate worship. Praise the Lord, it says. How good it is to sing praises to our God. Here, the community joins together in their praise of God. And when we keep reading, we find that the text gives reasons for such praise. For God is gracious. He heals the brokenhearted. He determines the number of the stars. According to this text, God is worthy of praise because God's nature is to be gracious. God is in the habit, so to speak, of healing the brokenhearted, and so God is to be praised. Other psalms give a different reason for their praise. Psalm 116 begins with, I love the Lord, and then, like Psalm 147, justifies this claim, because he has heard my voice and my supplications. But Psalm 116 recounts a specific occasion in which God acted. The snares of death encompassed me. Then I called on the name of the Lord. When I was brought low, he saved me. In this case, the text names a specific moment in history in which God acted, and praises God for that moment. We have then, in these two psalms, examples of two different ways of praising God. Some texts, such as Psalm 147, are descriptive. They praise the attributes of God. Other texts, such as Psalm 116, are declarative. They give thanks for a specific act of God. Recall my description of the Psalms a moment ago, the mirrors of human emotion. Psalms 147 and 116 in particular fit that description, for in them we can find the words to say when our hearts are full of praise for God. Yet they not only reflect what is in our heart, they also teach our hearts. In their praise, the Psalms tell us who God is, which, in turn, generates even more praise. In naming the attributes of God, Psalm 147 gives us a picture of God binding up the wounds of the brokenhearted, and then immediately tells how God determines the numbers of the stars. This juxtaposition of God's concerns, the wounded hearts of humanity, and the number of stars in the universe, teaches us about God's reach. The message is that God is just as concerned with the stars as God is with our own hurts. Likewise, the thanksgiving in Psalm 116 teaches us how God acts. It serves as a testimony, so to speak, declaring what God has done and encouraging us to remember when God rescued us in the past. The message is that God is a God who saves and who protects the people of God. So we have two distinct types of praise psalms, those praising God's attributes and those praising specific acts of God. And while mirroring the emotions in our heart, they also teach our heart about who God is. At the other end of the emotional spectrum from these psalms of praise are the psalms of lament. Like Psalm 116, Psalm 13 recounts the experience of an individual, but here the psalmist asks God to rescue her from her misery. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Consider and answer me. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. The language is raw and powerful, venting agony and begging God to intervene. In the last two verses, the lament turns to praise, and the psalmist makes a vow to sing to God when salvation comes in the future. Like the psalms of praise, psalms of lament also speak both in the solitary voice of the individual and in the corporate voice of the community. Psalm 13 recounts the prayer of a single sufferer, but texts such as Psalm 74 speak of a tragedy experienced by the larger community. The text begins in a manner similar to Psalm 13. O God, why do you cast us off forever? But the event that gave rise to this lament is the destruction of the sanctuary. And with vibrant language, the text describes the work of the enemy's axes, hatchets, and hammers, and tells of the smashing and hacking. And again, as in Psalm 13, God is asked to intervene. But in verses 12 through 17, the tone changes dramatically. Using mythic language, the psalmist recounts the day of creation in which God battled victoriously over the forces of chaos. Read alone, lifted from their context, these verses would sound like a psalm of praise. Yet this praise comes in the middle of a lament psalm, and the praise here serves the lament. In the context of current destruction, the worshiping community reminds itself of God's ultimate power. Although the enemy might have the upper hand right now, God has gained victory over more powerful cosmic foes and created the universe. In the first part of the psalm, the text mirrors the present agony of the community, but verses 12 through 17 remind the community about ultimate reality. The praise teaches those who lament that God has fought and won much more difficult battles. Psalm 74 is a striking example of how the Psalms can both mirror the suffering heart of the community and remind them of God's victory in creation. Praying Psalm 74 allows the community to vent its agony in lament and remind itself of God's power in praise. Yet ultimately, these Psalms of lament are prayers to God. And Psalm 74 asks God to do something quite specific. After the lament in the first part and the praise in the second part, the text ends with a request. Do not let the downtrodden be put to shame. Rise up, O God, plead your cause. Do not forget the clamor of your foes. The text is asking God to come to the nation's help. Knowing that this text ends with a request to God for help, how might we read the first and middle parts differently? Why is the destruction described so vividly to God? Why is God reminded about his work in creation? And how does both the lament and the praise work together in light of the final section? Put another way, how does the lament and the praise serve the function of the request? The Psalms pray with great boldness. In their praise and lamentation, they can indeed mirror our hearts and speak our deepest thoughts. Other times, they can teach our hearts about who God is and what God has done. Above all, they teach us how to pray to God. With their vivid language and strategic mix of praise and lament, these psalms challenge us to pray with just as much beauty and boldness as the psalmists did when they wrote them.